Hello, everybody. We are back again with And Another Thing with Jim. Luckily, nothing is going wrong in the world this week, Pat, although that's probably not true. But here we are to save the day once again. How are you doing?
It's post Phillies playoff loss, so not doing great there. But I did see that some of the Ringer podcasts will now be streaming exclusively. The video podcast will be streaming
Hmm.
exclusively on Netflix.
Oh,
So they get their payday, and I can only imagine that our payday isn't too far behind. So brighter days ahead.
yes, absolutely, Pat. What on earth do you mean about our streaming future? Tell me.
Just that I'm hoping for a large payday, maybe in 2044.
Oh, I thought you were referencing that you posted this content on YouTube this past week. So,
Well,
and
yeah,
maybe
I'm
you
looking
were,
big.
but you were downplaying it. Okay, so give Pat the big payday he wants and needs and deserves
Right.
because the podcast that we recorded and dropped last week on your favorite podcast platform is also on YouTube. So if you want to see Pat's and my smiling faces or grimacing faces or Pat shaking his head slowly and walking away from the computer, you can now do that in full video on YouTube. So far, so good, right, Pat?
Right. We're on it.
Okay. Well, we have a couple of sections for you again. They happen to be the same sections as last time. Pat, we're going to dip back into the sermon, the word, and then we are also going to go into the world. So this past Sunday at Liberty Collingswood, we were making blazing progress through the prologue of the Gospel of John. And I spent most of the time this past Sunday on what theologians have called the incarnation. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. One super fast side note, then we'll get to the main part. I'd meant to say this past Sunday that I was holding off on talking about the grace and truth part at the end of the sermon until we come back to the prologue again. So we'll get that at the end of that verse. We'll get that in the next sermon from the Gospel of John. But anyway, incarnation. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Pat, in the history of the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church has confessed both full humanity and full divinity of Jesus in the same person. And I took a swerve where normally in sermons, I told folks on Sunday, I'm happy to try to explain and give good rationales, biblically and otherwise, for why the church believes what it believes. But I took a respectful pass on incarnation, where, hey, this is what the Bible says. It's a deep mystery. It's really important for us to appreciate the beauty of this mystery, and this is one of those things when maybe it's better not to explain it away. I'll qualify that in just a moment, but what do you think? Incarnation, mystery at the heart of Christianity.
I haven't really fully settled on like my thoughts, and I'm also going to deviate a little bit as far as like, yeah, maybe that's incredible that there is like mystery to Jesus and God,
Hmm.
but if God had decided that there'd be no mystery, that would also be fine. So it's kind of like, kind
Interesting.
of, kind of like whatever, God would say is fine. Like if he explained it, I'm assuming that that would be perfect and good in the way it should
Okay.
be. And if he leaves it up to mystery, that's also perfect and good in the way it should be. Um,
Touche.
so that's like, some interesting kind of like things I ponder about sometimes. Um,
I like that.
yeah, so that's kind of like my initial thoughts is because like the deep mystery, and I'm someone who likes that, like just personally, aesthetically. That's like I like that, God
Hmm.
is so much greater and so much more mysterious, and that we can even fathom. Um, and so that kind of makes me more in awe of His power. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's my initial thoughts there. Is that the mystery is good, but maybe the mystery is good because Jesus said it's good, and if there was no mystery, then that'd also be equally as good.
Yeah, I don't think I have any pushback or disagreement there at all, Pat. I think my only follow-up question there would be if the incarnation was designed to be as shocking as it was, if it were completely explained rationally, would it be yet so shocking? I guess that's an unanswerable question at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think maybe it still would be shocking, um,
Okay.
just because of, um, yeah, just because like Jesus being a human and taking on, both human and God. Um,
Hmm.
Still shocking. Still has never, as far as I know, has never happened in the history of the world. So a one of one event.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker, however, in episode one, as you know, when Shmi Skywalker said to Qui-Gon, I think your generation is episode one. The There was no father. So Luke was also immaculately conceived, but that's not canon as far as actual history of the world.
All
So
right.
I don't know if you have
I'm
any
gonna
thoughts about.
no, I'm gonna stay away from that. I'm gonna let you
Okay.
keep going on that path yourself.
So Pat really wants to talk about Jar Jar, but we're not going to do that either. We're going to get back to speaking of the incarnation here for a couple of minutes. I did hedge my bets a little bit, Pat, and tell folks that, hey, we'll spend some time in the podcast in the word section talking about how even if the incarnation in the New Testament is never proven or rationalized or explained, but rather taken for granted, we still have good reasons to go through the rest of the New Testament and early church history and find some confidence that this really is the case. So let me throw at you a few different threads that confirm to me the reality of the incarnation, both in Jesus' humanity and divinity. On the humanity side, Jesus sure acts like a human being in the Gospels. And if Jesus wasn't human, why on earth would the Gospel writers be so intent on portraying him as that way and not shying from the rough edges of humanity that Jesus seems to take on? Things like Jesus was tired sometimes, he was sad, he was tempted, and the book of Hebrews later on in the New Testament emphasizes the same thing. So the humanity is there in spades, and Jesus seems like the best of us, and not just some stoic, hard to relate to pseudo person that kind of floats through the Gospels, but he is very much flesh and blood. And then you have the divinity on the other side. Anything strike you, Pat, about the humanity of Jesus as you encounter him in the Gospels, one way or another?
Yeah, you're right. He is like rather ordinary. Um,
Hmm.
in certain ways, as far as being a human, like I wonder if you kind of, saw him from a distance, or,
Hmm.
I guess I mean maybe I'm thinking more of like, his early life. I think,
Sure.
his ministry began, and once someone starts doing miracles, I think that's kind of, you're going to kind of not superhuman's not the
Gonna
word, but
stand out.
yeah, you're going to stand out. But when he was like 17, like I wonder if you kind of saw him in passing, like, that's just like a fairly unassuming person.
Right.
As I don't think we know about certain physical attributes all about Jesus. Um,
Correct.
but you don't hear that he was, you hear about a little bit of his, childhood,
Hmm.
clever and smart, but it's not like, this genius walks among us completely. He's, 6'6", 250, and can bench press 500
Right.
pounds. Yeah, so it is, he's like somewhat like rather pedestrian.
Yeah.
Which I think, if you wanted to just kind of create a figure that is a god that became human,
Hmm.
and you're kind of just making it up, you might kind of embellish some of those things. So I think that kind of, lends credence to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going through, I think I may have mentioned on Sunday also. Oh, I was talking about Solomon and constructing the temple around the tabernacle around the ark. So having spent time recently again in First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, it's striking to me, even in the passage about the anointing of David, how David's physical attributes are mentioned. He's the least among them, all of the brothers, but at the same time is incredibly handsome. And in the same passage where it's asserted that the Lord doesn't look at the externals, but sees inside. And then Saul, before that, is much, much taller than everybody else. And so part of his kingship is related to the fact that he's just a Joel Embiid level Victor Wembanyama big person.
Right.
And throughout the Old Testament, there are physical descriptions of this person and that person. Esau was a hairy man,
Sure.
uh, etc. But conspicuous in their absence are any physical descriptions of Jesus whatsoever. So the full humanity of Jesus is stressed, but then also Jesus is not described. Interesting. Uh, and then also the divinity of Jesus, and this gets at, I think in our modern minds, it's easier for us to believe, yeah, there may have been a historical person, Jesus, but the fact that he was God, that the divinity resided in Jesus in not just third generation cassette tape copy of a bootleg version of something that was pristine in the original, but an absolute representation, an image of the divine itself. Uh, Jesus was worshipped immediately, which is striking because also the original worshipers of Jesus were Jewish. And you get within the Gospel of John itself, Thomas at the very end of the book confessing having beheld his hands in his side, my Lord and my God. And Thomas fell down and worshiped Jesus. So the Gospel of John itself has no problem asserting the divinity of Jesus within the book itself. And then this is a verse that I mention periodically on Sunday mornings. Uh, about 10 years ago, I read the first volume of the Anglican scholar N.T. Wright's two-volume work of about the Apostle Paul. I'll get back to the second volume someday, Pat. But uh, Wright really emphasized this confession in 1 Corinthians 8, where the Shema, the Old Testament from Deuteronomy formula of the confession about the unity of God, is modified to account for the revelation of Jesus. Yet for us, there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Kyrios, which translates Yahweh from the Old Testament, Jesus Christ, through whom all things are and through whom we exist. So Paul is pointing to Jesus as the Lord to be worshiped, and other places in the New Testament too, and absolutely in the ancient church. So, both by internal records of post New Testament Christianity, and then also when people in the Greco-Roman world would start to write about what's going on with this sect following Jesus, there's agreement both inside the church and outside the church. They are worshiping Jesus as God. So it's simply not the case that the divinity of Jesus is something that attached to him later on. Roman emperors, for example, were not originally considered to be divine, but around the time of Caesar and then Augustus, especially in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, emperors began to be worshipped as divine, and then slowly that migrated back to Rome. It was Augustus, the first emperor, who was divinized by Claudius, I think his successor. And from there, you had like a slow growing apprehension of the divinity of the Roman emperor. But with Jesus, it was just 0 to 60. This is the one who also created all things, and this is the one who we worshipped. And then I have two ancillary points after that, but any big picture thoughts there? Divinity of Jesus and how immediately it was recognized in its original context.
I think that's a little bit of like a headier type thing to kind of dwell on
Okay.
and to kind of think about. You're right. There are a lot of people who, Christians and non-Christians alike, who believe there was a man named Jesus, walking around. But then the whole, like, he's the Son of God. He's the creator of heaven and earth, and the person who controls everything is where people say, I don't know about that. It's a
Yeah.
little whack, but again, certainly people on the ground like reporting that. is important, is incredibly important. I mean, there's a parallel to today, um,
Hmm.
what are you going to trust more? Something that kind of, a person who was there or people who were there reporting, or secondhand or third hand, like decades later, you can see how much like gets lost over time and embellished. And there's, political reasons for why someone may
Hmm.
be kind of, exalted to this thing. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly incredibly compelling. Um, for and I wonder also if some people need more like logical reasons, or they need that, like, they need more people who telling them like Jesus was divine and he was
Hmm.
God, versus like, what, whether or not, some early Christian kind of said it or said they were there, like, or said, that doesn't really change the fact for me that I believe like there is this God and there's enough other stuff. So I think it kind of gets a little
Hmm.
bit interesting there. Is like maybe some people don't even need that, as far,
Hmm.
to believe in God. And maybe people who believe in Christ, maybe have, that's not their big focus, is, they believe in grace and forgiveness and the good news, and they believe in God and forgiveness, and He's the creator of all things. And they haven't really thought about like, oh yeah, that's interesting that there was people there, with Jesus, or people that right after His life who also claimed he was the Lord.
Yeah.
Maybe it is something that's key to like their beliefs, is having that knowledge. And I would suspect that maybe are a great deal of Christians who, maybe haven't even considered the fact that, part of the reason I believe this is because, there are people on the ground who proclaimed his divinity at the time.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly possible that there's like a cohort there that's not really part of their consideration, um, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fair. They just kind of fall into the habit of worshiping the triune God and
Sure.
don't quibble with how it came about. So yeah, one of the things I really love about Christianity is both its depth, but then also its simplicity.
Sure.
So for some folks, hearing that Jesus was worshipped immediately is a good inducement that you should worship him too. For other people, it's yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
I'm happy to join the chorus.
Uh,
Two quick footnotes here. I also mentioned that the classic ancient formulation of Jesus, two natures, divine and human in one person, was the Creed of Chalcedon or Chalcedon in 451 AD. To anticipate objections, let me juxtapose both things. Jesus was worshipped immediately as God and held to be human. Why did it take 400 years for that to be codified into a creed? And to me, the answer is not because these ideas were new starting in 451, but everything took time to refine. So there were multiple heresies of leaning in too much to the one direction or the other. And I don't know how often people have read or how recently the Chalcedonian Creed, but I just want to read an excerpt to
Pretty sure
sort
everyone
of
reads
get
that like at least once a week.
first yeah, it's first on all of their feeds. The the precision with which the church eventually set the divinity and humanity of Christ. So the Chalcedonian Creed, part of it confesses one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, recognized in two natures, and these two natures in Christ, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. No confusion, no change, no division, no separation. The distinction of natures being in no way annulled by the union in the person, but rather the characteristics of each nature being preserved and coming together to form one person and subsistence, not as parted or separated into two persons, but one and the same Son and only begotten, God the Word, the Lord Jesus Christ. So it gets really fine-tuned really quickly. That's why there's this this time lag between what the church apprehended very early and every one of those words you have church controversies underneath. So anybody that wants to go deeper into that is welcome to. And then last thing I'll say, Pat, I think I've years ago, at least I may have mentioned this in a sermon, maybe sooner. maybe sooner. It might be interesting for people to ponder that in the early centuries of the church, both within the church itself and around, far more often was the divinity of Jesus accepted in an unquestioning way, but it was the humanity of Christ that came under question and fire. So it's just an interesting 180 from ancient times to modern times, where modern times, how could this person that walked the earth, just another schmo, actually be divine, be God? It was the opposite question then, in part because the evidence for the resurrection was so irrefutable, seen by so many people. People wondered, okay, like somebody that was kind of a spirit that didn't actually have a human body, somebody like that could maybe be resurrected if there wasn't actual physical death to begin with, or if Jesus was just some type of apparition. People did believe in spirits, demons, parademon type of beings. Maybe Jesus was one of those and not fully human. So take it for whatever it's worth. Divinity of Jesus, ancient church, by and large, question far less. But yeah, but was he an actual person like us? Was the question back then. Had you ever heard that from me or somebody else before?
Not really, no. No, I mean it does make perfect sense now that you've outlined it, where if you saw the resurrection or you were, right around for that to happen, the resurrection happened. That's, divinity's proof.
Hmm.
But especially with like the and there's some people here or people who believe in demons and all kinds of things, and I'm not sure I have my settled thoughts on all that stuff either.
Yeah.
But I think probably the way that they kind of viewed like demons and spirits was a little bit even fairly outlandish 2,000 years
Yeah.
ago. Even more kind of like, okay, that's maybe there aren't what you're imagining out there. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I certainly never actually considered that, is that it's a flip now and now the reversal.
Okay. Well,
So.
that's the word. Thanks for those thoughts and feedback. You can always write in another with Jim at gmail.com if you want to join the Chalcedonian conversation here. What do we have coming in world? Disclaimer right before that, Pat. This is where Pat, just a couple hours before the podcast, throws me a subject about something going on more or less contemporaneously in the world. I'm shooting off the cuff. This is not necessarily the position that I will take for the rest of my life, but what you get in more off the cuff thoughts is tentative thoughts and conclusions more than settled. I am absolutely convinced of what I'm saying biblically and all that stuff. So it's been fun so far, and it will be with this topic right here. Go ahead, Pat.
All right, Jim. So I want to talk New Jersey. I want to talk red light
Yep.
cameras, Big Brother. So I'm not sure if you recall, but there was a pilot program back maybe like 10 or 11 years ago in New Jersey
Hmm.
that installed red light cameras.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, if you blew a red light, then you're going to get a ticket, presumably in
Yeah.
the mail. I'm not sure the pilot program was statewide or it was certainly municipalities, but
Hmm.
whatever. And sure, everyone's seen them. Most of the people have seen them, been around them. That was
Yep.
quickly, you know, shot down and discontinued. And I was also someone probably 10 years younger, a little bit more brash. I was like, how dare they? Perhaps it was like snowing out and I couldn't stop, and I needed to run the red light, and all the
Right.
things
Yeah.
and, like Big Brother's watching me and this is ridiculous and it's a money grab by the municipalities. That's certainly
Hmm.
how I felt back then. I no longer feel that way. And so nowadays, like with the amount of people driving distracted, speeding, just running stop signs, red lights, I sure wish we had those red light cameras. And if people got dinged and, missed out on a couple $100, I was like, maybe that would teach them a lesson. And even if it didn't,
Hmm.
maybe my property taxes go down like 3 cents, because I'm not sure all that money would actually go to something important. So,
Yeah.
um, I think my question is specifically on red light cameras and
Yeah.
Jim, would you bring them back if you're governor of New Jersey? And
Hmm.
number two, in lieu of the fact that like clearly like humanity can't behave itself in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that we should go full Chinese like security state where if you make a post on social media, you get flagged by the government who says like you're not happy enough. But
Yeah.
do we need to have like, more cameras places to kind of catch people doing bad things to, dissuade them, or is that just a bad idea? Even going a little bit down that way because of the slippery slope. So yeah, so my two-part question there. What are your thoughts?
It's a really interesting question. So I was not expecting surveillance state when I looked at my texts and emails earlier today. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up. I'm uncomfortable with red light cameras. So if I was governor of New Jersey, like other previous governors, there would finally be a Bruce Springsteen fan back in the New Jersey White House. But unlike a previous governor that I have in mind, I would not be a Cowboys fan just for the sake of comparison there. So I have some big print reservations, but not so drastic or dire that I wouldn't be willing to flex and allow maybe there are some specific prudential reasons for something like red light cameras. But my concern is that exception by exception to the general rule that I am uncomfortable with the surveillance state will eventually, if I were in charge, lead us into a surveillance state that I don't necessarily love. I think there are two issues, and we can talk about these two things, and then whatever else you'd have as well. There's a surveillance issue, and then there's a which is the surveillance part of surveillance, obviously, and then automation or a mechanization issue also. So surveillance state. I went through a period a lot of years ago reading a lot of Michel Foucault, the French 20th century postmodern philosopher, and I didn't go back and check today, but I think it was in his book Discipline and Punish, where Foucault talked about the effectiveness of observation and surveillance as a behavior modifier and a tool of control and potentially oppression. He drew on Jeremy Bentham, the Englishman, who a century or so before drew up plans for the panopticon. Are you familiar
Yeah. Uh-huh.
with the panopticon? So
So,
it's a what's your take on panopticon?
I don't have any
Tell the listeners.
no, I don't have any overarching thoughts on it, but it's like a cool thing. It's a
Yeah, it's a fun idea. I mean, it would not be fun in many other ways, but so pan means everything, optics, visual. So a panopticon is a prison with no guards, but constant surveillance, where you have a central, at the center, picture a donut hole, but instead of nothing there, that's an observation tower with a 360 view, and then all of the prisoner cells are arranged on the outside, the inner edge of the outside of the donut where prisoners are just watched 24/7, and because watch carries with it control, everybody's going to fall into line. So that's an example of surveillance going crazy. I remember back in the 90s there were some school districts and the so part of my reading Foucault was I took a class on Foucault in college in New Hampshire. I think it was the state of New Hampshire that in a few school districts put security cameras and surveillance cameras on school buses, and parents were up in arms. We don't want our kids being watched like this, privacy concerns, etc. But then the compromise was this school district in particular had three school buses. They will all be equipped with cameras, but only one of the three cameras at any one time would be actually filming. So you have a two-thirds chance of getting away with it. And sociologists came around and saw that there was no statistical difference between behaviors in students that thought they were always being filmed versus only one third of the time. So the threat of surveillance was enough to curb behaviors. I think this is an example of God and the machine, where if God, the New Testament and the Old Testament both say is omniscient, and we are beholden to God. And in the Psalms, for example, the fact that God knows and sees all things is a deterrent to sin and bad behavior. That makes sense to me where we answer to God. If in surveillance state, divine omniscience is pressed down to the horizontal level, I start to get nervous because of sin. One of the recent theologians, he's still alive, has written and talked about a lot of things. His name is Carl Ellis. He was at New City Fellowship in Chattanooga, Tennessee for a while. He taught a course that I took at Westminster Seminary on the history of the African American church. His primary book is Free at Last, which is race relations, a theology of oppression, and that sort of thing. He's a pretty idiosyncratic thinker. I don't necessarily find myself landing everywhere he does. But one of the things he said in class, and you have in Free at Last, I think too, is the Carl Ellis equation of sin plus power equals oppression. It's just going to happen. And if surveillance is an incredibly powerful tool and in comic book language, it falls into the wrong hands, which is any set of hands because we're all mired in sin. I'm simply concerned that there would be no way to check abuses of simply increasing surveillance states. And if politics in our country seems to be more and more simply about power, either party will be tempted to use surveillance in more and more partisan ways. So that makes me nervous. And also, my brother lives in DC. Every time I drive through DC, I come back a couple weeks later to speeding tickets from the surveillance state in DC. And I just hate it. But I do have genuine reservations about increased surveillance. And in my mind, I'm willing to trade off on some security and safety for that. But I know that that's a tricky equation. So what do you think? Surveillance, power, abuse, oppression.
Yeah,
Why
so
are you, wait, hold on. Why are you for oppression and and violence and abuse? So
it's
please tell me.
it's just in my nature. No, so
Nice.
um, yeah, certainly I think having like cameras everywhere uh, doesn't kind of get at the heart of the problem. It's like slapping a band-aid on a problem, and I can't say that I'm
Sure.
for all that. I'm not sure where exactly I land, but if it's like slapping a band-aid on like a big wound, a massive wound, like sometimes you need something because if you don't put a band-aid on it and if you have nothing else, then
Hmm.
so it is a tough thing where maybe as a society we're not capable of tackling large systemic problems
Hmm.
at every level. And you think about like it doesn't have to be like cities, it can be sporting events and unruly behavior or something happening.
Yeah.
It, well, clearly our country has determined that we are not, and this is everybody, it doesn't matter right, left, is not capable of, in large ways, handling like large societal problems like
Yes.
unemployment, racism, uh,
Hmm.
poverty, what have
Yeah.
what have you. And so like there's going to be problems that occur, and sometimes it may be helpful to have some cameras, catching some stuff that happens, whether it's a hit and run driver, whether it's someone being assaulted on the streets, or
Mark Sanchez doing wind sprints.
exactly. Yeah, you need that. You need that right there. And so, um, yeah, I'm just wondering, and especially I think for me, I work in like the auto industry claims. So
Hmm.
I've seen, enough people kind of get maimed and killed and harmed. And it's like, it'd be nice if there was a camera there showing who did that or to kind of like prove that this, did happen. And I know that's a very,
Yeah.
very small sample size and it's not, you can't have,
That's significant.
yeah, yeah. So I think, I'm probably a little bit tainted by that. But yeah, so for me, the red light cameras, like people have just been are just crazy on the roads. It's, and I really can't have it anymore. I've like there's been so many times, and this wouldn't really stop this, but there's so many times that I've been running, just at a stop sign and just someone like blows a stop sign and almost got hit just dozens of times. And if there's any sort of cameras there that would kind of just make people stop and think, maybe I shouldn't completely run this stop sign or I might get like a $50 ticket, if that would help or kind of hinder 5%, it might be worth it. But certainly, like joking aside, if one is America and 10 is China, as far as on the continuum, as far as like how much surveillance I want, I'm probably at like a 2.5.
Okay.
So I'm certainly willing to kind of deal with the consequences of not being spied on, not having our privacy. It's already bad enough people just taking poor people out there, a video taken, they're walking down the street, someone takes a video of them, and then they're like viral for like
Yeah.
something stupid they did or nothing stupid they did. Maybe like, oh, look at this, unattractive, ugly person walking down the street, and that's sudden, boom, 6 million people have seen like this normal person walking down the street, and now like,
Yeah.
so, we don't need more video of people, except for red light cameras. So that's probably that's probably. But so I think you and I are probably largely in agreement here. Um,
Yeah, I don't think we're worlds apart.
no,
So I think you see the same dangers and I see the same safety risks and benefits, but it still makes me really nervous. And I would want as many safeguards as possible, but I don't trust those in power to use responsible safeguards. And the last thing I'll say before about surveillance, I could be wrong about this, but the use of surveillance is something that, in my estimation, crosses political ideologies throughout the couple of centuries. So sometimes it's the conservatives that are dead set against surveillance of different kinds. Sometimes it's the liberals, which to me simply indicates that it is this wax nose where sin plus power equals oppression. And when it's in our interest to surveil, we will, and when it's not, we'll oppose it on the basis of human rights.
well
The
said.
other the other aspect is automation and mechanization. And I wanted to make sure I got this title right. Uh, I think in 2018, 2019, I read a book called by Mark Grief, who's kind of a critic, philosopher, called The Age of the Crisis of Man, Thought and Fiction in America, 1933 to 1973. And kind of went back into mid 20th century where largely a result of the wars and what happened after the wars, World War I, World War II. And this is something that I didn't fully realize. There was a crisis of confidence in humanity among different pockets of intellectuals on both coasts in America and also central US, different pockets too, where it was a genuine sky is falling moment more than I think we appreciate from this vantage point. And one of the great fears about, hey, is humanity doomed after World War II was the fear of increased mechanization and automation of society and humanity. This relates to the AI conversations going on everywhere right now. The word that they used is not one that I think is continued in this particular usage. Technics was what they warned against. And it's a combination of mechanical stuff plus techniques, where we are increasingly reliant as a human society on techniques, where mechanized techniques will solve our problems for us. That was sort of the milieu, as I understand it, from which Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex in 1961 in his farewell speech. So that warning did not come out of nowhere. So he was very much involved with generalized fears about the rise of technics, which will eventually become a limiting factor on our own humanity. I don't think that fear was unfounded. And
No.
if anything, I fear that fear has proven true in ways that we could not have imagined as mid 20th century people. So this is less about the surveillance itself, but more thinking about surveillance as a species of the genus of technics, where this is just another aspect of our humanity that we're signing over to machines, and eventually we're going to be losers one way or another in indirect and indirect ways. So I fear the techniques of all of that. Um, but I think whenever we have skin in the game, we'll opt for techniques. That's the human condition aspect of it, where we're willing to sign it off. We're willing to give up some of our humanity and freedom if it benefits us. A practical example, I'm looking forward to the automated umpires next baseball season. I am so tired of these human umpires biffing balls and strikes all over the place. And so, as a baseball fan, a Phillies fan, I will benefit from a regularized strike zone. So I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Let's do that. But then I'm losing my humanity in the process at the same time. So I watch the Phillies as I lose my soul. What do you think?
So I'm going to keep my soul, and that may be a future podcast because I'm definitely anti getting rid of the umpires and just having a computer
Oh,
do it
interesting. Okay.
personally. But I guess the last thing I'll say here is that if if these cameras can nab one person on Route 55 throwing their Big Mac wrapper out the window, then for me, bring on the surveillance state.
I like it.
Uh,
Okay, that's Technics working for you and for me.
exactly.
I am on board. Okay, well that was our world section. Pat, any other odds and ends as we wrap up here?
Well, we have the wild card.
Oh
Um,
no,
yeah.
forgot the wild card. Yeah,
How could you
that's
forget the wild card? All right.
speaking of sports.
Yeah. So I'll get right to it.
Okay.
So my prompt is for you. If you weren't a pastor and that wasn't your occupation
Hmm.
right now,
Okay.
what is an occupation that you think you'd be strangely really good at? And I don't want to hear that, you know what, I'd be a great actuary or, or a great accountant or a great,
Yeah.
I want something more juicy or kind of like something that people might say, wait, Jim, really? I don't think you could do that. And so I'll give you mine real quick.
Okay.
I would say in a parallel universe, I think I'd be a good film director. Um, I
Oh.
think I'd be good at kind of like curating sound and music and different camera angles and kind of like bringing that together. And
Hmm.
so I think in another life, I think I'd be a good film director. I might have like a lot of movies might have like 30 on Rotten Tomatoes, but I think people would find them interesting. So anything that pops up to you is, an occupation or two that like, I think I'd be really good at this.
Hmm.
Anything you can think of at
Pat,
all.
I affirm that. I have two, and if a third comes to mind, I'll mention the third also. The one that probably wouldn't be a big surprise to people. I mean, neither of them would be a big surprise. I've I would enjoy the life as a critic. So whether it's a movie critic, a food critic, a music critic, a cultural critic, that would just be a lot of fun where I just sit around pontificating with a pipe all day and I get paid to do that. I think there are only 1.28 full-time critical jobs in the world at this point, and so that's not really a viable occupation for anybody, but that would be a ton of fun.
Okay,
And then riffing,
what type of publication like were you thinking like
oh, I think I would, so I'd want to be like a Christopher Hitchens, where I'm both highbrow and lowbrow, and would do talk shows, would do hits on news shows, would show up at galas and events. Like I could do a Met Gala
yeah.
and both look awesome, but then also make fun of everybody else who looks better than I do. And then yeah, maybe a book here or there, and then a more like refined upscale magazine that that sort of thing. I just want to be the type of writer where people say I read it for the articles, and that's me. Then the second thing, and this may be too close of a parallel with what you were saying, but I have had this thought before, so it's not just me making it up on the spot. Jerry Wexler was the longtime producer for Atlantic Records in the 1960s. I think he started, well, he was in the business of music, but migrated over time to the producer's chair in the studio. So he produced a lot of the Southern soul sides of Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett. The thing that always attracted me about the Jerry Wexler type of career is that he actually had no technical expertise whatsoever as far as music or audio recording, but he was just this guy that knew what he wanted to hear and was amazing at being able to communicate both to audio engineers and musicians and bands. I think this is what you need to do. So give me what you have, let me edit it. and then let's make some of the best music in the history of the world. I would love to be a Jerry Wexler, or kind of that's a Rick Rubin, I guess
Rubin, yeah,
too,
definitely.
where as I understand it, he was never like super technical.
No, not at all. I don't think he knows.
The Right, yeah, but he's just able to have the musical sense to be able to get it across. That would be awesome. And then kind of trying to think, is there anything manual labor wise that sort of counterintuitively could fit me?
Like, would you be a good landscaper?
No, I think our listeners will be disappointed to hear that I can't think of anything manual that I wouldn't totally suck at. So that's but bottom line is I'm useless in the probably the main profession for me would be one of those fat blimp human beings in Wall-E. When that's kind of what I would be, what I would be best at. But wouldn't it be grand? I like that wild card, Pat. That was good.
All right, cool. So it'd be a critic and a music curator of sorts, of like.
Producer, producer Svengali impresario.
Okay, well that sounds great. Um, Going back 2 episodes, we did have a little bit of feedback on our temperature.
That's what I had in mind before
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wild card. Hit
yeah.
me.
So I heard back from two people. One of them just said, "I liked your episode. I thought it was funny." Cool.
Okay.
Um, the other one agreed with me on the temperature versus the real feel, which is a big win for me, except that it was my wife. So I think it's still maybe a slight win, but she's like, "Yeah, I agree with you." And I was like, "Cool, all right, wonderful."
Okay. Well, I would take that and raise it. Whenever Emily agrees with me, it is a big win. So don't don't downplay
True.
the the amount of winning that you're doing right there. Okay, well, two against one. Finally, it's fair odds. I'll do a lot of research and come back next time.
Sounds good.
All right, well, that's what we have for this week, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. Keep in touch. Look for us on YouTube, and we'll keep going from here. Bye, everybody.